got the short straw, so I'm going to go first. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the City of Portland's Unreinforced Masonry Seismic Retrofit Project. Portland has the highest concentration of unreinforced masonry buildings, more than any other West Coast city, including Seattle. And I think all of you know about our Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. It's probably one of the best studied earthquakes in the world. Dr. Chris Goldfinger with Oregon State University just completed recent research. And based on his findings through core samples of the ocean floor, there's a 15 to 20% chance of a magnitude 9 earthquake in the next 50 years, and a 30% chance of the southern portion for a little bit smaller quake, a magnitude 8 quake, occurring within the next 50 years. But the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake is not the only seismic risk that we have here in Portland. Of equal concern to me is the Portland Hills Fault because it's directly underneath the city center. And while it can't produce a large quake like a magnitude 9, the damage associated with it because of its proximity to the city center could be as damaging, if not more, than the Cascadia subduction zone. So why do we care about unreinforced masonry buildings? Primarily because these buildings were never intended to withstand seismic shaking. They lack the structural connections that enable them to stand up. In Christchurch, 185 people died as a result of their 6.3 magnitude earthquake back in 2011. But what's really interesting is that of those deaths, 42 were a direct result of unreinforced masonry buildings failing in some way. And of particular note is that of those cases, it was the people outside the building that had more of a chance of dying than the people inside. So 71% of the people that died by URMs were outside the building. So I want to show you some damage to the historic buildings in Christchurch. Historic properties are an often overlooked casualty of earthquakes. This is the iconic Christchurch Cathedral. It's the heart and center of the city of Christchurch. The top of that spire for decades dictated the height of all other buildings in Christchurch. You could not build taller than that spire. So here's obviously before and after. This is the Odeon Theater. This is Mackenzie and Willis. It's a large interior design furniture store. You can see this red building here actually caught fire after the earthquake. But because the facade was really a very grand, ornate facade, they put up this massive scaffolding to brace it against any further damage from subsequent aftershocks. This is the Art Center of Christchurch. It's their arts and cultural center. It's a 28-building compound. They actually took this 20-ton turret down, thankfully, before the 6.3 earthquake. Otherwise, it surely would have fallen into the hall and caused more damage. As it is, this entire complex is closed to the public until 2019. This is at the other end of the Art Center of Christchurch. I often use this photo to showcase why you do not run out of a building when the ground is shaking. And again, notice that the people inside the building would have been just fine. It's the people outside that would have sustained significant damage or injury. This is Colombo Street, a major thoroughfare, kind of like Burnside in Christchurch. And you can see here, it's literally storefront after storefront of these unreinforced masonry buildings. Imagine trying to get a TriMet bus, an ambulance, a fire truck down this road. It would be practically impossible without clearing the debris first. So Christchurch lost 70% of the buildings in the downtown central business district. So I want to do a quick orientation to what you're looking at. These are what's called the Grand Avenues. They make up the perimeter of the central business district. This is the Christchurch Cathedral, the heart and center of the city. This is the Avon River, which flows through their city, much like our Willamette River. So here's before and after, and then one more, and then here's the Christchurch Cathedral, and then after. And the problem is that these weren't all unreinforced masonry buildings. The problem is these buildings sustained such heavy damage, they had to be demolished anyway. So just some more building damage. This is from the Nisqually earthquake in Seattle in 2001. Here's the Napa earthquake in 2014. This is a wine tasting room. And then Oklahoma now has the distinction of being the most seismically active state in the country. And this was after their 5.6 quake earlier last year. But it's not just seismic risk that makes these buildings vulnerable. You might remember we had a pretty significant windstorm back in December of 2014. This is the Zanabi Apartments in the Alphabet District. And you can see here the entire parapet came crashing down, thankfully injuring no one, but did do some damage to the sidewalk and cars parked nearby. Well, other predominantly California cities that have unreinforced masonry buildings have already passed mandatory retrofit laws, and some of the bigger ones, Los Angeles, Berkeley, San Francisco. And so in 2014, City Council directed my bureau, Emergency Management, to work with the Bureau of Development Services and the Portland Development Commission to introduce policies to mitigate the risk posed by these buildings. And it is possible to retrofit these buildings. You can do very simple things like brace the parapet, tie the wall to the roof and the wall to the floors. And we see here examples of retrofitted unreinforced masonry buildings. And these little rosettes are usually telltale signs that the walls have been anchored. You can see here the buildings still sustained some damage, but they did not collapse. And when these buildings are retrofitted to almost new building standards, they actually perform quite well. In fact, these two are electrical substations. Here's a historic church. That's a historic society. The problem with this external bracing here is that it would never pass muster with our historic preservation office. So these kinds of retrofits would not be possible in Oregon. Okay, I'm gonna go really quickly through this part. So the first thing we wanted to do was we wanted to really get a handle on what is the citywide risk. We were using about a 30-year-old database that was done by PSU engineering students through a windshield survey. So we wanted to make sure the database was still accurate. So we hired an engineer, put them at the Bureau of Development Services, and for over a year worked to update the inventory. And it turns out the database was actually quite accurate. We started off with about 1,866 buildings. 101 were falsely identified, and then we added some that we didn't catch the first time. So the entire universe of these buildings is about 1,884. But since that time, 154 have been demolished, and less than 280 have had either a partial or full upgrade. So at this rate, it would take another 75 to 100 years before we really solved our unreinforced masonry building problem. And where are these buildings located? They're really all over the city. They're obviously primarily concentrated in downtown, Old Town, Chinatown, but they're all along our major transportation routes: Burnside, Powell, Sandy, Foster. And if you think about how the city was developed along the streetcar lines, it makes sense. As an emergency planner, what this tells me, though, is that we're going to have a lot of debris to clear from our streets before we're going to be able to get ambulances and fire trucks back on the road again. Just a quick snapshot of what these buildings look like. They're predominantly 1- and 2-story buildings, and they're almost a majority, 82%, are for commercial use. So we convened a retrofit standards committee made up of engineers, architects, geologists, and historic preservationists to come up with performance standards for the retrofits. And so we said that at the very top end of the scale, your class 1, your critical facilities, we want you to have an operational performance standard. At the very bottom of the classification, your 1- or 2-story, very low occupancy buildings, we said, let's do the bare minimum, raise the parapets, and tie the wall to the floor. You'll see here that the majority of the buildings are class 3. And for this performance standard, we're using what's called a modified Bolts Plus. It's a standard that was actually developed in San Francisco, and it's a little bit short of life safety, but it's I think the best we can do for now. And we assigned a timeline for these retrofits. For step 1, all buildings have to have an ASC 41 assessment done, in most cases between 3 and 5 years. And then we wanted to put some intermediate milestones, so within 10 years you have to brace the parapets and tie the wall to the floor, and then you've got, in some cases, 25, potentially up to 30 years to do the full seismic retrofit. We did a We hired a nationally recognized expert to do a benefit cost analysis for us, and the BCA ratio was actually quite good. So life safety, of course, is the predominant reason, and for every dollar that you spend, you're going to have close to $2 in savings afterwards. I'm going really quickly because I think I'm almost over my time. These are not cheap, and certainly cost has been the biggest concern that we've heard from the property owners. And you can see here that if we were to do the retrofits for all 1,550 buildings that are remaining, it'd be in the neighborhood of about $1.4 billion. So not an insignificant amount of money. And of course, the city is also an owner of some of these buildings, including the Parks Bureau. So we are obviously going to have to do our own seismic retrofit work. Some final parting thoughts to wrap up. We're wrapping up the work of the policy committee. We hope to have recommendations to council by later this year. In addition to a recommendation to adopt a mandatory retrofit policy, we're also going to make recommendations regarding enforcement, primarily through fines and placarding, and then requiring tenant notification. So that's it for me. I'll turn it over to, I think, Richard.
Okay, I'm going to try hard not to be terribly redundant here with what everyone else is going to say, and give you sort of a case study of what we did and why we did it with respect to the new high school that's part of our $680 million construction bond program. Okay, so first, of course, you've heard a little bit, and you probably know a lot about the Oregon Resilience Plan. You're going to hear more about that in a later presentation on another night. But this was sort of our call to action. I attended a couple of presentations given by members of the task group that put together the Oregon Resilience Plan. About the time we were finalizing, well, we'd actually pretty much finalized the content of our $680 million bond program and began to connect some dots about opportunities and perhaps responsibilities that we should consider as we move forward in executing some of the very significant projects in that program. You know about this stuff, I'll skip that. This I think is really interesting, which you probably may have seen before, but that's the work that Chris Goldfinger did, categorizing and cataloging really the earthquake history over the past 10,000 years from the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And these big bars represent 9.0 earthquakes, and the smaller ones are 8.0. And altogether, he said there have been 41 in the last 10,000 years that were bigger than 8.0 in the last 10,000, and 19 greater than 9.0. And what I find fascinating is that the last one happened in January, the year 1700. That's 100 years before Lewis and Clark, so we didn't have much infrastructure then, right? And they know the day and the time of day because the Japanese keep really good records, and they can trace back to when the tsunami hit Japan and triangulate back to the records. So they know basically the time of day, January 26th, year 1700. So based on all the statistics that have been done and the probabilities, that's why you get these conclusions about what the statistical probability is of a 9 or an 8 in the next not too distant future, which is pretty sobering. This is kind of a graph that talks about what resilience means. A lot of people don't really, so what is resilience all about? And I think the best definition I've heard of resilience is being able to take a punch and get up and recover and move forward. And so this chart is trying to illustrate that when some disaster occurs, you lose a lot of functionality and it takes a while to recover. And you recover hopefully better than you were before. But we're very ill prepared, as you heard Carmen talk about, partly because we haven't had a lot of earthquakes. Our old masonry buildings haven't fallen down like they have in California, where they've had enough earthquakes that the old ones, they weren't reinforced, they already fell down. They haven't here. So our recovery time is likely to be much, much longer than in other places. Some of the interesting findings in the Oregon Resilience Plan, one of the key things, this is a kind of a faded map of Washington and Oregon. The fuel recovery, it turns out the linchpin for recovery in Oregon after this is going to be the availability of liquid fuels. Because without that, we can't run the construction equipment to clear the roads, to get people out to repair the water lines, to get transportation, to get, and almost all the fuel comes down in pipelines from Washington. We don't have any refineries here. Goes to fuel depot on the Columbia River, and in tanks here that sit on liquefiable soils, which will probably be in the river on fire after the earthquake. So there'll be no fuel in Oregon, which is a problem. Some of the other sobering statistics in terms of recovery time, you can see them here. Really long periods of time on average to recover basic public services and utilities. And age of here are the K-12, particularly of interest to me. The age of K-12 schools in Oregon is represented by this graph. You can see the other key facilities too. Oregon didn't even have an earthquake code until 1974. And that's about where this line is here, coincidence. And so a huge amount of our inventory statewide is pre-seismic growth. Huge challenge. So recovery time for key things like emergency shelters and, oh yeah, schools. The target in the Oregon Resilience Plan would be 72 hours for an emergency shelter, 3 days, 30 days or 60 days for schools. But this is what they think the average recovery time will be. Can you imagine that? 18 months, no schools. So this is Beaverton School District. You heard a lot about that already. And so I'm going to skip that and go to this. Okay, so all of this is gelling in our minds as we're beginning the, we've already done the planning and the budgeting for our bond program, but we recognize that there's an opportunity here to perhaps shape slightly differently what we do in the design of the new buildings, because we're going to be putting in 7 new school buildings as part of this bond program. And 3 of them are for new capacity because we're growing. Middle school, by the way, is done. High school, it's got to be done by September of this year. I'm going to have several hundred kids on my doorstep. That's not going to be good. And we will be finishing this school also up in North Bethany. We're also doing 4 teardowns and rebuilds. So that's where the 7 comes from. 3 are for new capacity, and we actually chose to tear down and totally replace 4 schools. So that's 7 new school buildings. So a huge opportunity. And we have $100 million of repairs and classroom technology and other things in this bond program. So we were connecting the dots here. Huge challenge, huge responsibility perhaps with this opportunity to build 7 new schools. To what standards should we build them? The Oregon Resilience Plan, as we saw it, was a call to action to do something, but it's not design criteria that I could give to our structural engineers and architects regarding how to design the building. So, the other thing that happens, when there's a disaster, where do people go? Across the world. Whether it's an earthquake, whether it's a major storm, some other kinds of disaster, they tend to go to schools, right? You see that all over the world. It's a gathering place. And that's the other dot we connected is if people, they don't have fuel, you can't drive around because the roads are out, bridges are down. Schools are different than other public facilities because they're scattered around in neighborhoods. And so most people, if they can't live in their home, they can probably walk to their neighborhood school. So we saw an opportunity not only to design the buildings with more resiliency in them, but also to consider what we might do in the design of those buildings so that they could serve temporarily as a community shelter after the event. And that took a little bit of different thinking than just what we do structurally. So we put together a group of stakeholders, including emergency response organizations, our lifeline service providers, our staff, as well as our design teams, because we started with, because we had such capacity crunch, we started with the high school and the middle school. We awarded those design contracts a couple, 3 months after the bond measure passed. We were moving pretty quickly, and they were already under contract when we did this. And we had some state agencies represented too. We were hosted by the Twalt Valley Fire and Rescue organization in their headquarters for a whole day. We had 30 or 40 people there, and we brainstormed what design criteria should we apply for our new schools that recognizes all of this stuff. And we had to decide fast because we were under time constraints to get these new schools going, and we didn't have a ton of extra money. I mean, the bond measure had already passed, and we had a finite amount of money, so we had to be mindful of that too. So we made a ton of decisions really quick. We've posted our report, by the way, on our website. We hope others improve on that if they have more time to think through what they want to do. But here's what we did. So here, in a nutshell, is the high school. It's 3 stories with a partial basement, 342,000 square feet. It'll have capacity for 2,200 students. The building itself, the hard cost of the building is about $100 million, and that's important when I get to the end of this and tell you what all the stuff cost that we did, because I think it's important to filter out the site development costs and the off-site costs, because that would kind of skew the apples to apples comparison. And it's got to be completed in August or else. Okay, so our strategy for the structure, we decided, you already heard that schools by code are supposed to be category 3 buildings at least. We chose to design the structure to category 4. Same as emergency response facilities, fire facilities, and so forth. And the rest category 3 with some exemptions. There's some non-structural components that are going to be part of the resiliency, the support to the community, so certain pipelines and other things in the building plumbing also were designed to a higher standard. Power, so we thought about, well, what about power? So if the buildings are going to serve as an emergency shelter, we're going to need to think about power. We decided to upsize the generators. So instead of just having generating capacity for emergency egress and emergency power requirements, we increased that. So we've got a 450 kW generator with 96 hours of fuel. That's not a ton, but it's some, and at some point we're going to need somebody to be able to get some fuel out there to continue that. However, we're also installing solar PV systems on each of the new schools. That is a state requirement, by the way, to have some green technology. For us, it's solar. And our design team, we're having a little challenge with the city of Beaverton now about our design because they've never seen this before and they don't quite know how to permit it. But they figured out how to design this so that the PV system can actually feed the building through the generator panel when we lose PGE power and therefore stretch the fuel supply if the sun happens to be on. We're still working through the permitting on that. So we'll have power for lighting and ventilation, but not heating and cooling. We figured that was probably a reasonable compromise. The other thing we did about emergency power is we wired the building at almost no extra cost, thinking about what parts of the school would be used as an emergency shelter. So the commons, the cafeteria, the kitchen, the gyms, the big gathering spaces, those are wired separately, so we can power those parts of the building independent of the classrooms, which we don't need all the rest of the classrooms to have power in order to support that. Heating and cooling, okay, water. So on-site, that's all we can do is on-site. We used restrained pipes for all the water and wastewater. Plumbing, we hope that the backbone systems from Twalt Valley Water, City of Beaverton, Clean Water Services catch up with all of that. We also thought about how do we provide water in an emergency shelter. We thought about storing water on site, too hard, too expensive, too much space, perishable. So instead, we plumbed the common parts of the building, again, the kitchen and the cafeteria and the locker room separately, and then provide stub-out connections outside of the building so that if a water truck could get there, it can pump water into those parts of the building. Just had to think through that. Didn't cost much more to do it that way. There we go. Okay, seismic plumbing, short-term work. Yeah, so sewage is a problem. We're going to need somebody to come with some portable toilets, probably to make that work. We assume natural gas will be disrupted, and we thought about an alternate fuel supply, didn't do that, but this is really important. If you haven't done this at your home, I haven't yet either, we all should put in, if you have natural gas service, an automatic seismic shutoff valve on the natural gas supply, because the last thing you want is a natural gas fed fire in a building after the earthquake. You know, the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was first really called the 1906 fire in San Francisco. That's because the city burned down after the fire started and there was no water in the fire mains and all of that. So we don't want, in case there's an ignition source, we don't want to feed it with natural gas while there may be difficulty in fighting fires. Telecommunications is a challenge. Okay, very quickly, I'm going to move over here so I can see what I'm doing. This is what we did in the building. So here's the footprint of the building. This is the kitchen, and so that's an area that's got separate power. This is the commons area. We figured part of it could be set up for sleeping, part of it for feeding, eating. This is the gym, auxiliary gym, and aerobic stand. So those are the key common areas that we chose, and then the locker room is actually on the level below that. Those are the key areas we chose to support. That's where the generator is, and there's one connection point there for water supply. Pets. You know, I'm an engineer, I never would have thought of this, but I have 2 dogs, and it's very obvious. Somebody finally said, you know, if someone can't live in their home and they've got pets, they're not going to leave their pets at home, they're going to bring them with them, right? So what do we do about that? Probably don't want dogs and cats running around loose in the commons area, and so we actually have a place that was easy to adapt. It could be a pet shelter in an area where we have deliveries, and so there's a hose bib there, and you could set up a little kennel or something. There's another external water tank connection over on that side that supports the locker room and showers that's below that. So what did all this cost? There's a quick summary. These were based on cost estimates. We didn't do any sort of actual auditing of after-the-fact costs. But basically, the bottom line is all those things that we did added about $1 million, we think, to the cost of the building. 1% of the cost of the building, pretty cheap. And we wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. One is we're not a developer, nothing wrong with developers, but we're not going to build the school and sell it off in 2 years. We're going to have this building for probably 100 years. And when you think about the probability of this earthquake happening within the lifetime of this building, it's scary high. So it seemed to us like, just from an economic perspective, a really cheap insurance policy to be sure that the building not only survives the earthquake, but with minimal damage, and could probably serve as a shelter, which was the second reason we did all this stuff.
Thanks. Is it me next? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. I'm decidedly low tech because I'm not because I'm representing City Club, but City Club has just begun its advocacy effort for our report. And so they said they didn't have a PowerPoint presentation ready for me, and that's okay. I hope it's okay with you. I did bring, and there are many still out there, these hard copies of the summary of our recommendations. And there's a website, and you can get the entire 80-page report with lots of references online. So if you want to look at it. And these two have set the stage for me really well, because when I was chosen to be the chair of this committee, like all the other volunteers, there were 15 of us, City Club members that were selected to be on this committee. We were purposely selected for objectivity, so that we would have no vested interest and therefore not a whole lot of specialized knowledge about what it is that we would be investigating. And so Carmen was the first person who came to talk to us, and our eyes were open by version of what she just said to you. And we talked with about 80 to 90 other experts along the way in our 9-month investigation. And I think that by the conclusion of our research process, all of us had really learned a whole lot about the Portland metro area's earthquake preparedness and resilience, both its strengths and its vulnerabilities. We focused, of course, because it's Portland City Club. We actually focused on the metro area, though, not just Portland. I live in Washington County, I'm proud to say, based on, and my son went to Beaverton schools. And we had a member from Clackamas County, but the majority of us were from Portland. And that's fitting, I think, because Portland is the economic engine that drives the region and the state. And one of our concerns in the Oregon Resilience Plan clearly was a signal to City Club and others that this needs to be looked at seriously. Also, the New Yorker article, the big one, the title of our report is Big Steps After the Big One. It kind of got a lot of people's attention, but it was kind of alarmist, and there weren't really very many solutions suggested in it, but it sure did get the layperson's attention. And so City Club said, gee, in the tradition of taking on tough issues and doing objective research about them and looking at what experts have to say and coming up with some practical recommendations about how can we get better prepared, how can we become more resilient. And so we now have, after I think somebody said 98% of the members, which is unprecedented for City Club. There's usually more controversy. I guess earthquakes are not as controversial, but even our recommendations weren't. 98% approved those recommendations, and now we're moving into the advocacy phase, where we are going to be talking with legislators, with city council members, with county boards, with school districts perhaps, and all the other folks that may have capacity to leverage change that would help those 14 recommendations get implemented. And I'm going to give you a brief summary of the findings and recommendations so you get a sense of them. But if you're really interested, because it's such a huge area, the 15 of us specialized. And so there was a group that looked at buildings specifically. And we have a number of recommendations that just focus on buildings and building standards. We also looked at the energy hub that he mentioned, and energy in general, but especially the critical energy infrastructure hub on the Willamette River. We looked at transportation systems and focused in on the Burnside Bridge ultimately as an important area to make recommendation in. And then, departing somewhat from the Oregon Resilience Plan, we also chose to look at social resilience. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think your community can help contribute to social resilience as well as physical infrastructure resilience. Because I think that you're all going to get rescued by our neighbors. That's who's going to rescue us first. Nothing to say about the emergency management people, but I think that's just a reality. So our fundamental question really was, how can this region not only just survive the earthquake, but continue to thrive after it, socially and economically? And that, of course, requires both physical infrastructure resilience, so people have places to go to school and go to work and live right after the earthquake, not 18 months after the earthquake. We know that this earthquake's going to happen. The timing is unpredictable. There are statistical analyses and things, but we don't really need to know when it's going to happen. We know that we have to commit now to long-term investment to enhance our resilience. We just need to do that. If it happens tomorrow, we're going to be in serious trouble. If it happens 50 years from now, I hope that this community, even though I won't be here then, will have prepared sufficiently to thrive afterward. So I'm not going to go into the tank farm problem on the Willamette River. We have a couple recommendations about that. One, to do a study on how to reinforce the liquefiable soils under that tank farm. There are apparently technologies, since I'm not an engineer, I won't talk about what those might be, but I understand that in other countries that are more experienced with this kind of work, they have developed some technologies to reinforce those soils, and actually the private corporations that own those fuel tanks said they would be interested in that. And we also have recommended that there actually be a state agency that regulates the seismic resilience of those tanks, because at this point, there isn't one. So we hope that the liquid fuel problem can be resolved. But right now, it's a pretty big problem because 90% of Oregon's fuel passes through that point, through that node. And buildings, our buildings group learned, to their dismay, that Oregon codes right now currently require that most buildings, not the emergency buildings and police and fire, but most buildings only be constructed to meet life safety standards. And what that means is that they will not necessarily be usable after the earthquake. And they may, in fact, as Carmen talked about in Christchurch, have to be torn down and replaced. That is not a very economically viable strategy for us to survive and thrive after the earthquake. So we've recommended that, that cities and counties be allowed to develop their own regulations about buildings and building requirements. Right now, the Oregon State has full discretion to impose its restrictions, and the cities and counties have to ask permission to have more stringent standards. We recommend that they be able to do that. And there are several other recommendations that have to do with public funds. Any building that's going to be built in part or wholly, like schools in Beaverton, with public money, should be built to the highest standard of seismic resilience, as they have done. And we know from our research that, like their experience has shown us, that additional cost on top of the total project costs is, well, estimates go from 1 to 10%. The 10% is generally for smaller projects. It's a kind of inverse correlation. The bigger the project, the smaller the percentage increment of costs to make this building totally level 4 in Oregon's terminology, earthquake resilient. We looked at transportation systems. There are lots of planning processes going on with ODOT and PDOT, and they have pretty much a 50-year processes underway. Very, very expensive retrofits and replacements involved, as you might imagine. But we zeroed in on the Burnside Bridge because right now there really isn't a bridge that will be usable across the Willamette River after the earthquake. And that includes the Selwood and the Tillicum bridges. They will stand, but those approaches will probably have to be reconstructed because they're built on liquefiable soils. They haven't been built to stand after the earthquake. But we knew that there was already a study underway about the Burnside Bridge, and so we suggest that that should be accelerated and prioritized, and that we need to have one bridge in the foreseeable near future that will stand. And it will have some added benefits to people and bicycles and cars even before the earthquake happens. So we think it's an important investment. But when I was asked to come to speak, I think that Jen, who heard me talk at City Club, said, we really need somebody to come and talk about the social resilience end of things. And because that is kind of a unique contribution, I think, that our report has made to begin to help people think about what does it mean to bounce back as a community. Clearly, it's important to have structures and buildings that will survive, but how can we build the social resilience of our communities before this earthquake happens? And in our report, we recommend a few strategies, but these are just a few. Basically, social resilience is on a community level. How well do people know one another? How much can they rely on one another? How can people work together, not only to rescue each other, but to go forward together? So we suggest that schools should play an expanded role in increasing public awareness of these issues, because we don't think people are aware enough yet. We also think that the neighborhood emergency teams that Portland Bureau of Emergency Management operates now, which by the way has a 1,500 person waiting list for their training, they need more resources to get citizen volunteers trained to be the initial rescue folks in their neighborhoods. And we also suggest that human services agencies that serve vulnerable people, people with mental health and disability issues, that they need to put continuity plans in place. They do not necessarily have them now. And if they're not standing up after the earthquake to serve those folks, it's going to be really hard, especially on those vulnerable people. And we also recommended that at a global level, that local governments need to assign responsibility for resilience, to elevate it to a prominent position in their calculus. Rockefeller Foundation has its 100 Resilient Cities program that you might read about online. And many of the cities that they've funded around the world, they have funded a resilience officer who works directly with the mayor or the chief executive of those cities to not just think about earthquake resilience, but resilience in the face of any kind of disaster or disturbance. And we think that our counties and cities need to do that same thing, however they might choose to do that. And there is an entity called the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization that I don't know if any of you have heard of, but they are doing the work of pulling together the 5-county metro region, which is Clark, Columbia, Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington. That's 5, right? That's the Homeland Security region. There are lots of different metro regions, but that's the Homeland Security region. And they are housed in Carmen's agency in Portland, but they're funded by a combination of all of those counties and some of the cities, and actually the metro government and so on. And we suggest that those jurisdictions need to kick in some more money, because coming down the pike is the possibility that Homeland Security will not be giving grants to the Portland area anymore for grant-funded positions, which that agency right now depends on. But even if that wasn't the case, we still think it should be locally funded. So those are the things that we've talked about in our report. Some of them directly affect you in the architecture, engineering, construction trades, the building recommendations. But I think that I want to challenge you also to think about how your work, how your planning and design work can enhance community cohesion. I'm sure some of you have been thinking about that already, but the social capital that's sort of the foundation of being a resilient community, the capacity to rebuild and rebound following disasters. I've looked a little bit, I confess, that I'm just dabbling, because I'm a public policy analyst. I'm not an architect or an engineer. But there seems to be quite a bit of literature out there that talks about the ways that the built environment can increase community cohesion and that feeling of connectedness to one's neighbors. I saw a study, a 2014 study that was done in Taipei of an incredible number of neighborhoods, because there's lots of neighborhoods in Taipei, where they demonstrated through asking people how connected they felt to their communities, and they used a scale, an objective scale, that the compact, walkable neighborhoods that I'm sure that you've thought about, that that also provides space and facilities for community gatherings, for community outreach. Those were the places where the sense of community was the greatest amongst residents. It's common sense, kind of, but there's also some studies closer to home that PSU folks have done about new urbanist communities like Fairview, which is pretty old now, a suburb on the east side, and also the Orenco Station idea. And you know, it's a debate about whether people who choose to go there are naturally more socially inclined anyway, or whether it actually brings people together because it's just such a great place. But one researcher said, you know, generally speaking, I think what we found is that if you build it, they will come and they will walk, which is a good thing, right? So increasing community cohesion, like a lot of the things that we would do to prepare ourselves for this disaster, actually have lots of co-benefits. They can benefit us right away. And communities that are the kind of communities that these folks have been studying, there's lots of documentation that crime is reduced, that public health is improved, that property values can go up, that vulnerable populations are more likely to be supported, that aging and disabled. And generally, one happiness researcher says, this increases a sense of well-being and reduces stress. Now, how could you go wrong in that? And I also, I have seen, there's lots of literature about sustainability, right? That's been around in your field and in common parlance for a long time. But I think that the same principles that guide you towards sustainable designs also fit extremely well with designs that will foster community cohesion and resilience. I think that there's just a lot of overlap, and I think the field is starting to talk about that, and maybe that's why a lot of you are here. So I think that basically I think we're all in this together. And it's going to take all of our skills and resources and talents and perspectives to move the Portland communities forward on this path toward resilience. And I really commend you for being interested in how this can get done. And I hope that you're all going to use your creative minds and talents toward that, because I think we will not only survive, we can thrive after this.
So I'm going to talk really briefly, I think I've got a few minutes here, on a lot of the topics that the people have shared today are broad, and I'd love to talk with some of you guys afterwards about some of your stuff. But I will give a shout out to the report that the City Club put together. That's a very good report in terms of just synthesizing a lot of the resiliency information from a lot of places here locally and across the state. I thought it was very well written, and so I would encourage you to get down with that, take a look at that if you haven't already. I'm going to talk about USRC, which is the United States Resiliency Council. They put together a building rating system for primarily for building performance in earthquakes. They're expanding into glass and other natural disasters, but it's primarily comes out of a lot of work that was done by the Structural Engineers Association of Northern California. And the reason why the USRC is different than maybe just kind of what we get when we design a building to code, whether it's category 2 or 3 or 4 that we've heard tonight. Really a lot of those metrics don't really, they tell us about safety, right? They talk about life safety, people won't die, or they're not supposed to die in a code building. As you go up the risk scale up to 3 and 4, you have less and less chance of loss of life, and even less and less chance of damage. But they really don't talk about how long your building is going to be out of commission before you can repair it, right? If I build a brand new building across the street to code, earthquake happens, I mean, what's my sense of how long that building is going to take to repair? And how long or how much is it going to cost me to repair right? Those are key pieces of the puzzle that if you're trying to make decisions in terms of prioritizing buildings for resiliency or mitigation or strengthening, right? We want to know how much it's going to cost us, how long we're going to be out of it, what our performance is going to be. And this first slide I have here is that there really is, and I think one of the speakers mentioned it, it's just, I think Carmen did, about, buildings are not earthquake proof. A lot of people are, there's a misconception that I've got a brand new multi-million-dollar building, and this thing's bulletproof. But we can go back to Loma Prieta or Northridge, and in those earthquakes, the buildings that were heavily damaged, building owners are going, look at my building, it's very new, it's built to code, it's damaged, what's happening? The structural engineers are going, yeah, this was great, right? Because it performed as it's supposed to, nobody died. And there's no guarantee that there's any sort of lack of damage or minimal damage in a code level building. And there's a big misconception, I think, amongst the general population, most of us, that the building will be heavily damaged just in a design level earthquake. But a lot of the damage that comes in an earthquake, and I think Carmen mentioned this, is a lot of the damage in terms of just loss of value comes in the non-structural components. I mean, I'm a structural engineer, and most of my career has been focused on beams and columns and footings and walls and making buildings stand up and be strong. But the thing that really gets a lot of these buildings out of commission is the non-structural stuff. In Loma Prieta, there were hospitals that got taken out of service, not because of structural damage, but because of fire sprinklers damage, and they flooded all the floors. And they had to take people out of intensive care and move them out on the lawn, and people died. And that was non-structural damage. It wasn't necessarily building damage. And so the non-structural components are a big deal, especially in buildings that are heavy process buildings or buildings that are high importance. Buildings that have data centers in it, or emergency response centers, or hospitals and fire stations and whatnot. And so non-structural can drive a lot of those types of building damages. USRC uses a couple different methodologies to try to capture that damage and also the loss of use time, how it's going to take you to get back into the building, and also how much it's cost to actually repair that. And that comes through these two documents here. This is a relatively new document, the Seismic Performance Assessment of Buildings, FEMA P58, put together over essentially a 10-year period, and $10+ million spent by a lot of, by primarily FEMA putting that document together. It's in a risk-based assessment tool. It's different than this tool that you see over here on the right, the seismic evaluation existing buildings. This is ASCE 4113, which is going to be which is referenced in the URM provisions that the City of Portland is putting together. These are two methodologies that get to the same answer a little bit differently. This one here, FEMA 58, is cutting edge in terms of just the methodology that uses ASCE 4113 can be used and be translated into some of the ratings. But just really quickly, the reason why, and I'll touch on it again, is the reason why ratings might be of relevance to building owners or other entities that are interested in buildings. How safe are the buildings after the earthquake? What needs to be repaired? What's the cost? How long is it going to take to get back in? And those are really the questions that, if, like I mentioned before, if I'm trying to prioritize, or if I'm even trying to understand post-earthquake response planning, right? If I'm a business owner and I'm trying to, and I make widgets, right? And I need to know if my building, how bad my building's going to be damaged and how long I'm going to be out, so I can't make widgets anymore until I can make widgets, right? How much that's going to cost me to fix my building, to fix my equipment, and also what are my opportunities for loss of income just due to loss of market share. Right? We can buy insurance for fixing the building and business interruption, but we can't buy insurance for loss of market share. Right? So I'm making widgets here, my competitor makes widgets in Kansas City, but they're going to crank out widgets while I'm not cranking out widgets, right? I lose customers. And so this is really important to me in terms of just how long I'm going to be out of service if I own a business, understanding that USRC gives us an opportunity to try to take that down, to understand that, so we can make good decisions, right? Because if I own that business making widgets, I may choose to spend some money to strengthen my building or anchor my equipment or brace my pipes, so that instead of being out for 6 months, I'm out for 3 weeks, right? And I can't make that decision if I just get a, hey, your building's a life safety building, what does that tell me, right? If I get a seismic evaluation, I can't really understand what that does to my business operations without this type of rating system. So here's the rating system. It really covers 3 dimensions. It covers safety, and this is kind of what we talk about with building code, category risk 3, or 2, 3, and 4. But it also talks about damage and recovery. And you can see as you, the highest here is the best performance. Damage up here is minimal, so less than 5%. This is a building that is going to be essentially operational, turn the lights on right after the big earthquake happens. You know, this is what Dick is shooting for in the Beaverton School District. And recovery that takes to actually get back in and start functioning again, basic function, so that I can go back in and maybe that's just minor cleanup of a lot of non-structural components, ceiling tiles down, bookcases have fallen over, but I don't have immediate damage. You know, that's where I want to be here in this recovery immediate to days if I have expectations of occupying my building really quickly. But you can go down, and as you go down the scale, you'll see here that things get more dire. The cost of fixing the structural damage goes up higher, or structural and non-structural goes up higher, and the recovery time increases as well. USRC has a rating system similar to what you might see with LEED, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. But the lowest level is what's called bronze, and bronze has a oh, I had somebody nod with my pointer here, but bronze is a 3-star, so loss of life unlikely. This is probably pretty close to a life safety type approach. But you're going to have greater than 40% damage, and you may not be able to back in your building for 6 months to a year. I know that FEMA sets thresholds for if it's a building that is eligible, like a public building eligible for federal funds. FEMA sets a threshold of 40% replacement cost. If the damage exceeds 40% replacement cost, they're going to tear that building down. They're not going to let you fix it. And so this 40% threshold here is a really important number that people want to try and stay under. The next category up is silver. And again, this isn't necessarily an improvement in the safety aspect. You're still here less of unlikely, but significant damage less than 20%. You're probably weeks to months. So here you might be, 8 weeks to 6 months type range. The next level up is gold. So this is probably closer to a category or risk category 3 type buildings, where you have serious injuries unlikely, lower damage percentage, and faster time to reoccupy. And then the highest is platinum. And it's no coincidence that these kind of line up with the LEED rating system, right? The same colors, or the same metals anyways. And this one is the highest level. And this platinum is extremely difficult to get to, and you have to go beyond code, beyond even risk category 4 to get to the platinum level. But here's kind of a graphical representation of what these kind of buildings might look like. So here's platinum gold here. This is an operational type depiction where maybe silver here. This is a risk category 3 building. This is what a school would normally be as a silver, a risk category 3. Down here, bronze this is life safety, and this is what a normal code level building would get. Everybody walks out, nobody dies, hopefully. But building might be, as mentioned before, a complete throwaway. And that could be any building, whether it's built in 2017 or it was built in 1994. I know that Dick had a slide where he talked about the majority of the school building stock in Oregon was built pre-1974. And if you go back and you look at the codes, the code level seismic forces have increased from 74 to now about 6-fold. So back in 74, when the first seismic code came in Oregon, you designed it for about 3% of lateral load. Now you're up at about anywhere, depending on what your system is, maybe up to 15% of lateral load. So you have significant amounts. So just right out of the chute, if you have an old building that's never been touched, you've got no chance of probably, you're probably in collapse prevention or probably even less than that. And unfortunately, we have a lot of building stock that's there. The value of the ratings, one of the, as I mentioned kind of before, is business continuity planning. USRC can help us with a safety aspect of it. How do I come up with, I think somebody mentioned evacuation plan. How do I come up with an evacuation plan, or how am I going to know how to respond to my building if I really don't know where the damage is going to be, right? If I have a better understanding of maybe where my damage is going to be or how my building is going to perform, I can have a better opportunity to put together an evacuation plan that will actually work when the earthquake happens. And damage, how much cash do we need to repair it? A lot of developers and building owners in Portland tell me, well, I've got earthquake insurance, so big deal, right? And I talked to one developer who has over 400 properties here in Portland, and they're like, yeah, we have earthquake insurance, we won't worry about it. But there's a significant amount of dollars. There's usually this premium, those deductibles are about 20% of the value of your property as far as the damage. You're responsible for the first 20%. That can be a pretty big number, especially if you have a commercial property, even if you only have one, that can still be a pretty good number. So understanding kind of what your damage levels and the repair costs is important as well. And then also the operation time and recovery. We talked about that, if I'm making widgets. If maybe you're just a renter, you're a tenant in an office space, you want to know, hey, is the building that we're moving into, is this safe, right? Are my employees going to be safe? There's a building downtown Portland right now that has tiles popping off that I'm not really sure about that. I'm sure that building's very safe. But I mean, those are the types of things in an earthquake that we know we might take for granted if we're just leasing an office space, and we would want to know that. And also just operationally, a lot of people have computer servers on site or they have it at a data center maybe. Building performance for those types of facilities is extremely important. Right? How many businesses could live these days without any sort of network? We all have phones, and there's no way that we can live with those. Those are the electronic leash. But a lot of the important decisions might be made in terms of how the building's going to perform, and also, what's the landlord going to do? How quickly is he going to restore the building? If that's my only office space, where do I go to work? Right? Does everybody come to my house and work out of my garage, or how does that work? And so that's an important decision I want to know, or I want to understand as well. And then also, how long can I serve our clients? We're a professional service firm, but we would have a hard time not servicing our clients without some sort of office space as well, not just making business. And all this is, I think everybody mentioned this, but the ability to achieve these higher ratings, depending on the size of the project and the system that you choose, concrete, steel, wood, it's 1 story, 2 story, 10 stories, 50 stories, whatever. Generally, it's not going to be, we're not talking huge rental costs. And when you think about, even if it's a 10% cost to raise my building up to a platinum level, right? So at a platinum level, I would expect 5% replacement or 5% damage. Well, if I spent that extra 10% in the earthquake happens, and I'm only spending 5% to fix my building, versus if I spend nothing, I pay the first 20% after the earthquake happens, right, to fix my building. So it's present dollars that I'm spending now to save future dollars. Right? I'm buying insurance, and in that sense. And so that's a good decision. And here I'll plagiarize Dick's quotes here. That's his slide. He didn't know that I took it. Mountain Site School. This is just an example. Again, there's no new news here. This is the same slide, but 1% cost for the cost of the high school, and then also for middle school and the K-5 elementary schools, similar numbers, less than 2%. You can see that these are not big dollars that we're spending. And in terms of the benefit that it provides, to me, it's a no-brainer. I mean, some of the stuff is a complete no-brainer. Let's talk about insurance really quick. Insurance can be expensive, or some places it's not even available. But as I mentioned, the repair costs likely go down. And if you were to elevate your building to a gold or platinum building and spend that extra 5-10% to do that, you may choose to then simply remove earthquake insurance. You say, well, I'm going to save those dollars, those premiums that I'm spending every year, and I'm going to spend that now and upgrade my building, but I'm just not going to have earthquake insurance, and I'm going to become self-insured for earthquakes. Knowing that my building will perform at a higher level, I won't have to outlay as much cash, and I'm going to take those dollars that I would have spent each year in premiums, right, and I'm just going to put them in the bank, and I'm going to become self-insured. And the longer that timeline happens, in terms of if the earthquake happens 10, 20, 30 years from now, that kind of pension that you have there, or that kind of annuity for replacing that, easily covers the cost of upgrading these things. And lastly, using USRC to become resilient, I've kind of put together some really simplistic bullet points here. But to me, the first part is just about planning. I think people have talked about that, and it really comes down to timelines. To me, if I want to come up with a resiliency plan or strategy, I need to understand what my time frame goals are, right? If I'm pumping out widgets and my goal is to be operational in 3 weeks, well, my resiliency plan might look very different than if my goal is to become operational in 6 months, right? So I have to I got to draw a line in the sand. I got to pick some time that I want to achieve. Or if my goal is, hey, I want to be operational in 3 days or 3 hours, right? My resiliency strategy or my resiliency plan might look very different, right? So we have to, and a lot of it comes around, how quickly we want to be back in these facilities. The school district has said 30 days. That's what the Oregon Resiliency Plan has, 30 days back in basic operation. The next piece is to assess what your inventory is, assess what your buildings will do. You have to have information, bring that together and synthesize that, and then you can start to prioritize where you're going to, based on your timelines and your objectives, you can start to prioritize what maybe those mitigation aspects would be. Maybe that's strengthening, maybe that's just, I'm going to tear down and replace schools as we grow, or I'm going to put in bracing and re-roof and put down plywood on my roof when I re-roof. I build it in on my plan over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But then at least I have an idea of what I need to do, and I can start to prioritize that stuff based on the ratings that I get. Then mitigation, systematically go through and address all your risks. So your rank them 1 through whatever, and you come up with a list of which things you're going to tackle first. One of the clients that we work with is Colombo Power Administration, and they have, across their transmission 5-state region, they have 1,200 buildings. And so we help them take those 1,200 buildings and stack them into a prioritization layer, which took us a long time, I can tell you that. But with that, we lay on top of it, the buildings that are really bad performers, URMs, the tilt concretes. But then we also talk about, what's their purpose? What function do they serve? Are they an operations center? Are they an office building? Are they a control house? And then also we lay on top of that, what's the electrical priority to, how important is that to the actual transmission grid? So you take a number of these different priorities and you can stack them on top of each other, and you can do this, then you can decide how to systematically mitigate, right? You just start going through the list. And we're starting to do that. We're doing a very small one with Newburgh right now, as Alan mentioned, in terms of just helping them prioritize and going through. And they're at kind of step number 2 right now. But that's really the strategy, in my opinion, when you have large inventories of buildings that you go through and plan some of that systematically plan that. And then the last one is this recovery, and I'll put, I should have put response and recovery preparedness, because there's 2 components. A lot of people spend a lot of time on response planning, right? They do scenarios where they make sure communication channels work, and police are talking to fire and whatnot, and how they respond. But we also, in my opinion, need to have smart response scenario planning, and part of that goes back up to assessment, where if I don't understand where the damage is going to be or what severity it's going to, how it's going to occur, the distribution of that across the landscape, how do I go to put together a realistic scenario? And so when we do the assessment piece of it, we do this for water utilities and for power utilities, where we can figure out where the damage might be. Well, then you can come up with a realistic recovery scenario or response scenario to that, and then you build on top of that a recovery scenario where if I fix this piece of this pipe over here first, I can restore water to these customers, versus if I fix that pipe first or whatnot. So it can help me then understand where I need to align assets, right? If I have, for example, like eWeb, water district down in Eugene, and they have Willamette River runs straight through them. They have lots of assets on one side of the river, lots of vulnerabilities, but their maintenance and operations centers on this side of the river. It's like, if all the damage happens over here, how do you get across the Willamette River where there's no bridges, right? So part of their strategy is, well, hey, we need to build a secondary maintenance center over here, right, to store materials so that we can be smart about how we're going to recover. They wouldn't know that unless they did some of this response, some of this assessment, and understand where the damage is going to happen. And so the scenarios I would propose would be based on actual assessment. I'm going to shut it off right there. I'll turn it over to Alan.
So at this point, I worked back in the early 2000, 2005 for a firm that worked a lot for what is now CenturyLink. And some of the work studies that they did were for the central switching communications buildings that are downtown Portland. And between that and the building kind of diagonal to a Pinnock block, which has now a lot of fiber optic and communications coming into it, all of those buildings are a disaster. And probably will come with them. And CenturyLink could never come up with money to deal with it. Well, that's going to impact everything if the communication systems go down. And I've never really heard a strategy to address how we deal with a private entity who really can't find a funding path to deal with what we consider kind of a critical infrastructure issue. And so we can, have all these buildings that will stand. If you don't have a way of transmitting data, you're still, it could be years. And so I would like to kind of challenge everybody to start thinking about ways that we can, I don't know if it's a tax that builds some different facilities or what it is, but that's kind of one of the biggest issues to me.
I'll take that. I do think that in disasters around the world, we've seen that of all the systems, telecommunications has actually performed quite well. And companies do bring in mobile systems very quickly thereafter. So will the buildings be standing? Probably not. The cell towers will be standing. And I'm not as concerned about telecommunications as I am about fuel and electricity, to be quite honest with you. And we are aware about the Pinnock block. It's an internet hotel. The city relies on the Pinnock block for most of its fiber optic telecommunications. We've now had redundancies, so in the event that the Pinnock block goes out, that we've got a backup coming in. So I'm not as concerned about telecommunications as I am about other critical lifeline systems.
And I would just reinforce that. We had to prioritize for our city club research, and communications clearly was one of those areas that the Oregon Resilience Plan looked at, and of all the areas that we looked at, it's not that it's no risk, but it's lower risk than some of the other critical areas. So we should pay attention to it. We should, but.
For sure. I mean, it's really difficult to operate without water power. It's almost impossible to resume normal operations without telecommunication, right? But in terms of the hierarchy of some of those services, probably water power are more essential. During the freeze, the snowstorm we had here in January, our water went out because we had a frozen pipe. And I'll tell you, in a family of 6, with no toilets for 2.5 days, it's really tough to operate without water. And I could deal without having a telephone for 3 days. But water power is really difficult. So I think those are super important, but in terms of the hierarchy, I would kind of agree in that sense that those other infrastructure pieces are probably more important.
I have a question regarding resilience as it relates directly to architects, contractors, and engineers, and I think Salus Resilience would be really good at answering this question. You did an excellent job explaining how owners can get involved in helping make sure buildings are resilient, but as of today, what can an architect or an engineer or contractor do to encourage follow through with these kinds of things? Who should they be talking to? The people in the room tonight want to know how they can help, and because you're a consultant that specializes in that, I think you would be best suited to answer that question.
Yeah, and I think the best way to participate is as you're here tonight, just getting educated, trying to disseminate that and build awareness. One of the things that I run into all the time is just a lack of awareness of people within the professional, not necessarily the community. I mean, the engineers are, a lot of my colleagues are very well versed in this. It's communicating that to the building owners and convincing them that it's actually something that they need to have happen. They need to take care of. Because I guarantee there's nobody in this room who has any data points on a major earthquake in Portland. And none of us have, maybe people come from other areas, but in terms of most of us who've lived here all our lives, we have no data point in terms of how much damage there's going to be. And so we hear about it, we see articles, but we really don't, we can't put flesh to it in terms of how real it's going to be. And that's the hardest thing. And I think if the more people talk about it, educate others, provide social awareness of it, the more that people will give it credibility. And there's certain other things, certainly, legislatively or jurisdictionally, they can be forced down, and people can be made to do the right thing. But I think it's just, you got to continue the conversation. Is really what it's all about. Just keep talking about it, because if people stop talking about it, then it just goes away.
Which brings up my next point. We've got 2 resilience education seminars happening in the next 2 months. So if you are interested and still want to participate, we're continuing that conversation.
I just want to add, as a policy analyst, I'm also a different kind of consultant. And sometimes the most important thing I think you can do with a client is to ask the right questions. Based on your own knowledge and experience, to ask questions that will get them thinking about the important issues that you're aware of. It's as important, if not more important, than forcing them to comply through statutes and regulations, because I think most people can be persuaded if they understand what the issues are in an arena. So it's the art of asking the right question at the right time.
Yeah, I would also add to that, as from the perspective of someone representing an owner, I think you all can, architects and engineers and others in the technical area, can help educate the owners when you are marketing your services. And as a representative of an owner, we do interviews to select architects and engineers for our projects all the time. And I think there's an opportunity there as part of those presentations to distinguish yourselves by recognizing this issue and pointing out to the owners how a small investment that you know how to deliver for them can achieve significant benefits in the long run. And I think, just as Terry said, that the arguments are compelling when they're laid out there, and to make that presentation as part of your proposal, I think could even win you some jobs.
Just want to add a comment. The biggest challenge in doing what we're talking about is coming up with the money. So the awareness is very high, but when you are a public agency, you have limited dollars and a huge responsibility. How are you going to allocate that dollars to do this building versus that building? It's very hard. And I just want to add another comment. When we do a seismic upgrade, because I'm in the middle of 2 projects currently doing for Washington County, there is the structural element cost, which is straightforward, not easy to estimate. But then there is that other cost, which is the interior, and it adds 30 to 40% of your project budget, because that's my experience. And then there is another cost. If you're doing an existing building, moving the people out of the building, and for that period, for the duration of that project, and that add to the project. So we're not talking about just seismic, which could be, say, $1 million, but you add to it all these other costs. Suddenly that $1 million is $5 million. And that's just, so it's not just that hard cost to do seismic upgrade. It's all these other costs that you have to pay attention to. And again, how are you going to pay for it? Where is the money going to come from?
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially if you're mandated
Yeah.
as a city entity, you say all public owners need to do enforcement. How are they going to pay for it?
Well, we are trying to come up with some financial incentives and a couple of things that we're doing.
That's how you're gonna be able to do it.
Yeah, well, we, in the legislature, we introduced a bill that would give property owners a 15-year tax exemption to put towards seismic retrofits. We're also taking a look at a state historic tax credit. I agree with you. The relocation costs, the displacement costs are huge. The cost of doing nothing is greater. So, yeah.
I agree with
Yeah.
that too.
And another way to try and mitigate those big soft costs like you're talking about, moving people out, is stretching out the time duration that you're doing this training, right? If, for example, if the mandate is I have to put plywood on the roof and anchor the walls to the roof, well, if I just put a brand new 3-ply roof with gravel on there, I'm going to rip all that off just to put plywood on and do that. But if I can wait 15 or 20 years, right, for example, until I'm ready to replace that roof and I put plywood on there, that's super cheap, right? So part of it might be phasing. It might be rather than doing it all at once, you phase it, you can really do it. Or if you have an office building, you have a seismic strengthening plan, this half of the building moves out because you have a new tenant, or you did strengthening there, and then 2 years later, when this lease is up and a new tenant, then you finish the strengthening there. So and I think there's some flexibility in some of the mandates that are coming out in terms of there's a period of time that you can implement those. But yeah, just doing it all at once is super expensive, especially in an existing building. And if you have a building where you have to keep it operational 24/7, like in a hospital or
Like a
for
jail.
Bonneville Power, their facilities are 24/7.
Facilities.
So you're working through all of that, and it's not cheap.
It's not cheap.
There's no doubt.
So there's that other cost now we have to
Oh,
account
yeah,
for.
there's all those soft
So
costs.
it's no longer as affordable, and so it requires lots of planning and lots of thinking ahead.
And
Come up
public
with that money.
education and awareness, I would say. I mean, the taxpayers need to understand what the trade-offs are. We have a little box in our text that says about the Portland Public School System, replace or retrofit. And there are big cost trade-offs to be considered, because retrofitting, most of those are, many of them are URM buildings, all of them, almost all of them. And just simple life safety only retrofits of those buildings is incredibly expensive. And so that's sunk costs into these old buildings that eventually probably should be replaced. Well, they should be replaced maybe right now. So the question for taxpayers is, do we really want to spend millions and millions of dollars on these old buildings, or do we want to have a planned, phased approach to replacing those buildings? I think that, and that's a matter of public education as much as it is the strategic planning of the school district. I mean, everybody needs to be on board with that, clearly, because either way is expensive.
And unlike a jail, our clientele leaves during the summer. At least part of it do, less and less all the time. But I don't mean to make light of that. We did deliberately make a distinction between retrofits of existing buildings, which we are doing to life safety code, and that's really as far as we can go with those, to the criteria for new buildings. Figured that was a different special opportunity, and so we applied, by choice, a different standard for those than we're doing for retrofits. To do what we're doing for the new schools in an existing building would be prohibitively expensive, for sure.
Have you had any dialogue with historic preservation groups in any way that, because I can understand different philosophies on what a building is and whether it sticks around forever, or if you don't do anything to it in 50 years, it won't be there anyway. So what's the point, kind of, yeah.
No, I appreciate that question. We do have Peggy Moretti. She's the executive director of Restore Oregon. On our policy committee, we've got Brian Emmerich, who's also on the Landmarks Commission and also on our policy committee. It's a real issue because there is a concern about the loss of these beautiful historic buildings. I will tell you, though, that for those cities in California that have adopted a mandatory retrofit law, we're just not seeing the demolition rates that people are really worried about. So the demolition rates in Berkeley, San Francisco, LA, all under 20%, and in some cases even less than 10%. So will this result in demolitions? No question. Will it result in this kind of, wholesale, we're going to lose all of our historic structures? I don't think that's the case. But I appreciate the concern that I'm concerned. I love these buildings too, but they will kill people. So, yeah.
Watching the presentations, which all of which were very interesting, coming at it from different perspectives. And by the way, I'm from Seattle, and I am interested to know if there's something like this organization that serves our Puget Sound area. It seems like it is just as important, if not almost more important, with our whole situation up there. But this whole organization that you guys have brought together, it seems to me there are a lot of analogies to be drawn to the whole LEED credit movement, if you will, in the sense that you guys are thinking ahead and working towards these new codes and so forth, and processes of building these buildings and constructing them, not only constructing new buildings but also retrofitting existing ones, but giving these owners some sort of incentive to do these things that are so important, because it seems like, to me, you can have the government come in with kind of somewhat of a clumsy, heavy-hand type approach, which people end up, they'll have to obviously grin and bear it, but they probably will resent it at the same time. Or conversely, you can have an approach that utilizes some incentives within the free market that these builders will respond to. And if I were, let's say for instance, I had built a company and I was looking for space in a building, and I cared about my 100 employees and I wanted them to be safe, and I knew that there's a high likelihood of some sort of seismic activity, I would be very, I would be inclined to find a building that had been built to these codes so that I knew my people were going to be safe, and I was going to be safe. And so anyway, that's a long question, but I kind of teed it up for you guys.
If you're in Tokyo, absolutely. Buildings that have higher seismic performance in Tokyo command much higher rents. San Francisco, you see that a little bit as well. Unfortunately, in Portland or even in Seattle, I'm not sure that owners get higher rents at this point for a building that's been strengthened or built to a higher level than the guy down the street who just built to code, which is unfortunate. And so that's really one of the very few kind of market drivers that would incentivize owners to actually spend the dollars. When you're talking about retrofit, the newer construction is probably easier to sell if we can show that it's cost neutral or a very small premium to get to these higher performance levels. But unfortunately, the market forces just aren't, at least here in the Northwest, they're just not quite there yet, which is really unfortunate.
Portland is having a friendly competition with Seattle to see who passes a mandatory URM policy first. So Seattle is also working on it. I think Ryan's absolutely right. There's no market for it here yet, and it's because of this cruel anomaly we have here. We're in the most seismically active area in the world, but we haven't had an earthquake in 317 years. I think it will take the earthquake to create the market, quite frankly. And until then, I think Seattle has more of a market because they had the 2001 Nisqually quake. So I forgot to mention one incentive that I do think the building owners will respond to it, is a FAR transfer program. So we're willing to offer a floor area ratio transfer to kind of monetize the value and sell it to help pay for the seismic retrofits. So we're working on that.
Yeah, and then one last thing, this last snowstorm you guys had, which I was somewhat tangentially involved in. I escaped, it was like escape from Alcatraz or something. Anyway, not to say Portland was Alcatraz, but it was crazy. Anyway, the long story short, I think that to me represented in just minuscule way
How we're
the
prepared.
conditions on the ground.
Absolutely.
And this world is going to be like when this thing hits. And that's so scary because that was just some snowfall. Can you imagine if there were physical damage associated? all the things that you guys described. I mean, talk about cataclysmic. So anyway,
I
that,
I just want to say, one of the recommendations, one thing that's really scary to me is that there are a whole lot of single-family homes that are not yet bolted to their foundations. One of the single biggest things that could happen that would make it so fewer people would need mass shelter is the recommendation that we made to require point-of-sale disclosure of seismic resilience of your home, whether it's been bolted or not. I mean, you can choose to sell it without it being bolted, but it is not a mandate, but it certainly could turn into an incentive if the public becomes more educated about the importance of that. That's one simple, relatively simple thing that can cost maybe $5,000 or so for the average house.
Okay, one last question.
Well, actually, it's more of a comment. I actually think that we're finally at a tipping point where there is financial incentive to retrofit some of these buildings. I mean, I'm seeing in Old Town Chinatown buildings that I never would have thought would have gotten retrofitted because the high-tech market is kind of desiring these rawer spaces, these older spaces, and there are a number of examples now where the market forces on their own are starting to come in and pick up and touch some of these buildings that, 5 years ago I would have said is a pipe dream. So I think we're at a tipping point.
So I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'd like all of us to give another round of applause to our